the Accelerating Net Zero Chemical Manufacturing series, organised by KTN and in partnership with Innovate UK, Suschem, and the Bioeconomy Cluster Builder. So I'm Matthew Reeves. I'm Knowledge Transfer Manager for Materials Chemistry and Formulation in the Chemistry and Industrial Biotechnology team at KTN. A bit of housekeeping just to start this off. So all participants will be muted throughout the webinar. Please use the Q&A box for submitting questions for the speakers throughout the webinar. So do feel free to do this at any time. Use the chat box to highlight any technical issues that you might be having, and we'll try and get those resolved for you. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording link will be sent to you afterwards along with the presentations. So just a little bit about KTN. We have an established and growing network of innovators whose ideas will bring about positive change across the economy, society, and the environment. With deep sector expertise and understanding of industry needs, we forge powerful connections that accelerate innovation in these areas. And that's essentially why we're all here today. So I mentioned that this webinar is part of a series that we've been running since July, looking at the infrastructure and feedstocks that will be required in 2050 to enable a net zero chemical manufacturing sector. This is the final feedstock themed webinar in the series, with the brokerage activities taking place on the 15th of December. We've got a fantastic set of speakers lined up for today, and they are in order of appearing: Dr. Martin Atkins, CEO of Posiedon Plastics; Professor John McGeehan, Director of the Centre for Enzyme Innovation at the University of Portsmouth; Dr. Alex Lord, Strategy Advisor at Sylatech; and Dr. Keith Whiston, Research Fellow at INVISTA Performance Technologies. So just before we kick off, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the context of the webinar series. Essentially, we are asking the question, which feedstocks will we be using to produce chemicals in 2050? One of the initial activities by my colleagues was to map out the research, innovation, and support work that's going on in the UK right now. And this map is available to view on our website, so I'd recommend going and checking that out. So if we come back to the central question, the answer will greatly depend on the state of the oil and gas industry in 30 years' time. So one scenario that we can imagine is that oil and gas remains the central feedstock for the chemicals industry, and we achieve net zero by reducing energy consumption and capturing carbon emissions. But in another scenario, we drastically reduce our use of oil and gas and switch to other feedstocks like biomass, CO2, syngas, and or waste polymeric materials, which expands the number of ways in which the industry can lower its carbon footprint and produce chemicals more sustainably. But of course, to switch to alternative feedstocks like this and to use different processing technology on a large scale is not a trivial exercise. So what we're trying to do here is to bring together all the relevant stakeholders to facilitate the understanding of these new value chains, to identify the appropriate chemistry that needs to be carried out, to identify what some of the localized opportunities are, and to encourage different technologies and disciplines to come together and make the business case for change, but as part of a wider system. And we can start exploring these issues today as part of a conversation around using waste polymeric materials as a feedstock. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in our first speaker, Dr. Martin Atkins, CEO of Posiedon Plastics. Over to you, Martin.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Matthew, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you all today. We're going to be talking about plastics feedstocks and the work that's been going on in Posiedon Plastics for polyester recycling, and also some exciting work going on with Green Lizard and Abundia on plastics recycling. So I'm going to attempt to share the screen now. See if you've got my IT skills are up to scratch. Can you all see the first slide?
Yep, you just need to go to presenter now.
Yeah, you can all see the first slide?
Yeah, you want to start your slideshow?
Yeah, let me do that now. Okay, everyone okay with that?
Yes, good to
Lovely.
go.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity today. We'd like to talk to you about the two aspects of the feedstocks which are going to be available for your time frame horizon 2050. We've been looking at plastics, mainly polyolefin type plastics. That's in Green Lizard and Abundia, and then on the Posiedon Plastics, where we do 100% circularity of PET wastes back into monomer to make virgin PET. So I'll start with the plastics because that's a good introduction into the activities. I think everyone on this call knows the background on the plastics. We know the problems that they produce in the environment. We also know the challenges that are associated with converting those plastics efficiently into feedstocks for the chemical industry to be reused in the chemical industry. So most of the technologies will either be in this category, either in pyrolysis or catalytic upgrading. Big challenge with catalytic upgrading, of course, is to remove all the contaminants from the plastic. So our approach is to do the pyrolysis first to get into certain types of product, and then do upgrading of that separately. So if I just move on to the next slide here, you'll see some typical. I mean, you've probably all seen those pictures of the materials coming out from waste. We work in a full supply chain consortium activity. We manage the waste as it comes in. We do two types of technology, which we'll say a little bit more about later on. But the critical nature of our technology and why we're differentiated from others is that we're focusing on the wax materials from polyolefins. These waxes can be upgraded to a variety of products that are used in the industry today, and been very useful feedstocks for added value materials that are not tied to oil price, such as the waxes and lubricants to a certain degree. So we look at the upgrading of the products, and most of these are by hydrogenation. So it gives us opportunities to move into the use of green hydrogen, which is something else we've been following closely with the KTN and some of the other activities in the UK. So we're really starting from the supply chain at the front, and we're looking at our partners developing the downstream with us for those products. So this is a bit more of the value chain that I've explained about there. In one particular mode of commercialization, we're working with Riveridge in Northern Ireland, which is a waste site. So we take waste directly from the MRF. It's collected. A lot of that waste is collected from the blue bins or the green bins or the black bins, as I'm finding out now, are also used extensively in certain councils. So we work with the site. We use real feedstocks that have been through the separation process. The technology that we use is very robust. We'll be using, for the first generation plant, we use a flow system. They're rotary kiln-based systems. There'll be two 20,000 ton, approximately 20,000 ton flow trains on that particular activity. Our second generation, which is under development here in Teesside, is actually a very compact pyrolysis unit, quite an innovative reactor design, and that's primarily used to get very high yields of waxes. But you see, when we go through these technology blocks, feedstock is very important. Our pyrolysis unit has to be robust to all the different types of contaminants that are in the feedstock to a certain extent. A lot of those impurities can be removed by units in the waste treatment unit. But things like PVC, you'll never get to 100% removal of those. You'll never get 100% removal of biomass, contaminants, bits of paper, and so forth. So the pyrolysis unit, whichever you look at, needs to be very robust to take advantage of cheaper and advantage feedstocks at MRF. So as I say, we're really looking at producing these waxes as the long-term goal for this project. It's a huge market. It's a $6 billion market. They're used in all sorts of applications. But on the way there, of course, you do make diesel, you make kerosene, and you make LPG. So depending on the partner mix and depending on the technology that needs to be developed and the markets that need to be served, our technologies offer a completely, I guess, flexible process from all the way from LPG right the way up to paraffin waxes. Our second generation is focused on a much more improved and compact system. So that was a run into plastics with Green Lizard and Abundia. We're now coming on briefly to the Posiedon Plastics. This is a venture we set up about 18 months ago. This is already at Teesside. We've got our team here. It's in the Wilton Centre, so it's in the manufacturing catapult, and we're looking to put the UK's first chemical recycling of PET plant at Teesside here. So again, I think a lot of you have seen this slide or seen the top bit of that slide many times. It takes the way through the whole supply chain of PET resins, from the crude oil feedstocks right the way through to the resin manufacture. All different types of products, whether it be shirts, fibers, films, trays, bottles, coloured bottles, clear bottles. They're all produced and used in the markets. A lot of those, when they come for recycling, are downcycled or landfilled. Only the very clear. We actually use a phrase water white, but it's actually means clear bottles which are mechanically recycled, and that's a big activity today. If you go to the bottom half of that screen in green, you'll see that where those really difficult to recycle materials, whether they be mixed fibers, whether they be trays or films, our process now takes all of those materials and it converts it back into a monomer, which we call BHET, which is actually the feedstock for making fresh PET. So we're in the middle of, we're just finishing the feed study. We're going into detailed engineering, design and cutting steel next year, early next year, for the UK's first 15,000 tonne plant. Our technology is based on a glycolysis route. So we have a proprietary catalyst system and a solvent system in there. We use ethylene glycol to react with that catalyst with waste PETs, various descriptions. They then go through various separations where we purify the BHET for use in the virgin PET production, and all the coloured components and contaminants are recovered or reused in another part of the process. So we can depolymerize virtually all PET waste, even mixtures of PET waste, and we focus with our partnership on making sure that the CapEx and OpEx is leading edge, best in class. It's a fully integrated concept we have with all PET production facilities, and with that way we can bring down the cost. Key thing of our technology is that whether you're starting from fiber or mixed feeds like jazz or trays, that we basically have full circularity in the PET with our waste materials. LCA is very good. This slide's we're not going to discuss it at length in this call, but they've put some references there for people that are interested, haven't seen this slides before. But obviously, as we look at the feedstock at LCA carbon footprint, we can see that the enhanced, what we call our chemical recycled PET, is getting on for half the carbon footprint as virgin material. So a lot of data here, a lot of excitement, and a lot of reason for using this type of technology for recycling plastics. And we'd just like to thank on all of our supply chain partners, all of our PET production partners, the partners all along the way in the line, from the process design center in Holland and so forth. Would really like to thank them for their interest and support, and thank you very much for listening to these talks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin, for kicking us off this morning. So next up is Professor John McGeehan from the Centre for Enzyme Innovation. So over to you, John.
Great, thanks, Matthew. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so thank you for the invite. Yeah, it's great to be part of this, actually. I'm glad to see such a big audience with this as well. It's really super. So yes, basically I work on enzyme technologies, and we've been working at Portsmouth University on enzyme technologies for a couple of decades, actually. We cover a large range of different applications, from synthetic biology to healthcare, industrial biotechnology, and more recently, we've moved our focus towards plastics. Just as a kind of context here, when we're looking at biological depolymerization, we're looking at all sorts of polymers. So this is natural polymers like DNA or cellulose, lignin. So we've spent an awful lot of time on the cellulose and lignin depolymerization. And then more recently, moving to PET, you can see that the jump between these polymers is actually quite straightforward. You just need a different enzyme class, focusing on a different type of bond. And normally there are systems out there in the environment that you can bring into the lab and push towards industrial applications. So that's really what we're about. We had a couple of decades worth of work on cellulose depolymerization, and this was to make sugars from the green stuff here, the cellulose, crystalline cellulose. Of course, oil and gas prices are such that those cellulosic biomass facilities became very difficult to operate competitively, but maybe that will come back one day. Lignin depolymerization is a bit more interesting at the moment, because we can, rather than slating this for energy, we can convert this to some very high value chemicals for upcycling into really interesting products, including chemicals, composites, plastics, and also fuels as well. But we're really concentrating on green chemistry here. So we're working on a whole range of enzymes to do this. And then more recently, following the discovery of that plastic-eating enzyme in 2016 by that Japanese group, we have moved into looking at enzymes that can depolymerize plastics. And we have the center called the Centre for Enzyme Innovation, principally funded through UKRI, through Expanding Excellence in England grant from Research England. Of £5.8 million, which we got awarded last year. That was matched by the university, and we were able to open our centre. And in the past year, we've hired 15 new researchers from across the world. So there's now about 30 of us, all working on the different areas required to develop all these different types of enzymes and really get them to market. You know, part of the process here is, of course, speaking to the people in this audience. Okay, so you may have seen some of the press. Our first paper, when we solved the structure, the 3D structure of the plastic digesting enzyme PETase in 2018, reached quite a worldwide audience. And we published a paper last month, which I wasn't even sure if the media would pick up, but they did. And again, it went really global, which is good for the profile of this type of technology. And we've had an awful lot of interest from industry following this. And this is based on a biological process that's happening right now in nature. These bacteria here, these little rods, are sitting on the surface of plastic, secreting a couple of enzymes that actually break down the polymers. And these bacteria can then use those monomers as a source of energy and carbon. On the left here in panel A, you'll see the electron micrograph of a PET bottle surface. And then you can see in B here, after about 4 or 5 days, the surface is starting to degrade following the addition of powdered enzyme to the reaction mix. And C is one of our engineered enzymes that does this process a bit faster. And this really comes from an environmental evolution system, because if you look out there, you can see that nature has lots of polyesters naturally occurring. If you look at the surface of green leaves, for example, you'll see they've got a waxy type of coating, and this is a coating called cutin, which is also a polyester. So bacteria have evolved for millions of years to be doing this. What we're doing is looking to see if any can actually tackle aromatic and semi-aromatic plastic polymers instead of cutin. And what we can see here on the left is the active site of the natural enzyme called a cutinase that eats the plastic, the natural coatings of plant leaves. And if we compare that to the petase enzyme, you can see that it looks very, very similar. It's just the active site is a bit more open, which allows it to tackle PET. And it's actually only a few DNA changes that have allowed this to happen. So we're very excited about the possibility of other enzymes out there in nature waiting to be discovered. There's two enzymes involved in this process. The petase itself binds to the solid plastic surface, and through interfacial catalysis breaks down the PET to mainly MHET. There's a second enzyme called MHETase. That was the paper we published earlier last month. That breaks down the monomers further into terephthalic acid and down to ethylene glycol as well. And the combination of these enzymes in nature proved very powerful. So why is this interesting? Well, as we've just heard, through the Posiedon using the glycolysis route, this is in some ways similar in that we're breaking down the PET chains into the monomers using these two enzymes. The good thing about this is that it's very low energy. These enzymes operate at very mild temperatures without solvent. There's very low carbon, and there's actually very low waste as well from these processes. So there's no salt-based waste coming out of this. They're highly selective, so you can tune these enzymes to tackle different types of bonds and therefore different types of plastics. And they're tunable and scalable. We have all the technology available for scaling up enzyme technologies. They're used in the food industry, biofuels, I mentioned, pharma industries as well. And in fact, pharma has come along and helped us to scale things up. So this is our pipeline. The blue bit here is discovery. We literally go out into landfills and try and discover new bacteria. We've had a great collaboration with Yellowstone National Park, looking in those hot springs for unusual thermotolerant enzymes that we're hoping are going to be a lot faster. We then take those back to the laboratory and engineer them to be faster using biophysics and X-rays and structural biology. We then work with our fermentation colleagues to scale these processes up. And as I discovered quite early on, speaking to some of our recycling companies, they don't necessarily want enzymes, they want processes. So we've just had a grant awarded from our local enterprise partnership to build back better. So they've given us £1 million to contribute to building 3 new labs at the university. One is a biorecycling laboratory, so we can start tackling real waste streams and mixed waste streams, contaminated waste streams. Polymer analysis, so that we can really get down to the molecular details of the substrates and the products that we make. A polymer synthesis lab, that will allow us to take those monomers, remake and upgrade plastics, and then test those as well, so we can start to look at the whole process and value chain. We'll also have an innovation suite there run by Rory Miles, our innovation fellow. And the purpose of this is really to get industries in talking about this from an early stage and really try and see how we can work together on this. So currently we're in plastic number 1. We have some enzymes for potentially plastic number 2. We're working on those, maybe 3. The others are pretty difficult, 4 possibly, 5 really difficult. So I think the message here is that we're going to need a mixture of technologies. We're definitely going to need pyrolysis at some point for some plastic waste streams, but for others, we may be better on low carbon, low energy systems like enzymes. And I'm really interested here about the microwave technology as well. I think there's room for all of these in different streams. The plastics problem is very similar to the problem that's been running for many years in the biomass industry, looking at these mixed, so the equivalent is of biomasses, laminates or composites, these things we're quite used to doing. So we can either develop single-use enzymes to have a sequential process, or potentially cocktails of enzymes that we can use together to try and tackle some of these more difficult waste streams as well. So just to finish off, our ambitions are to do faster, more efficient and cheaper enzymes at scale. So that's a grand challenge. We need to widen our substrate and product range from biomass and plastics. And I think using the combination of those things could be really interesting, taking those monomers from plastic, putting in biomass monomers, building up upcycled plastics like fiberglass and carbon fiber and things. Is really exciting space to be in there, I think. Linking these enzymes together, maybe, enzymes that digest cotton and PET so they can tackle mixed plastics directly. And then, really industrial applications through partnership is going to be our bread and butter going forward. At Portsmouth, we are engaged in Revolution Plastics, which is a wider grouping to include things like policy and local community and those sorts of interactions, behavioral change. These things are all part of the process here. So enzymes is just one of the kind of core scientific areas that we have. And we also realized quite early on that we're going to have to work in consortium. And we've just joined a consortium called bottle.org. You can look that up. That allows us to bring together all the big national labs in the US and some of the bigger universities. And this gives us the critical mass to work with some of the bigger multinationals to try and adopt this sort of technology. And again, this slide just shows the different types of deconstruction technologies that we think. We're not saying that enzymes is the panacea here. It's one part of the jigsaw, but getting down to monomers is going to be incredibly important. Bringing in possibly biomass to upgrade and really create value out of those waste streams, because that's the economic driver that was just mentioned that we really need to push forward. So lots of people to thank, but thank you everyone for listening, and happy to take questions later.
Good stuff, John. Thanks very much. So just a reminder that if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll come to them after everybody's spoken at roughly 11 o'clock. So next up, we have Dr. Alex Lord from Sylatech. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Matthew. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, good to go.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, thank you to Matthew and KTN for organising this and for inviting me here to speak today. So I'm going to be speaking to you about Reversis, which is a chemical recycling technology for end-of-life plastics. The technology has been developed by Sylatech Limited. Sylatech specialise in bespoke design and manufacture of microwave technologies. And it's these expertise that underpin this technology. We're collaborating with this on ENVAR, which some of you may be familiar with. They operate 25 mixed recycling facilities in the UK and Ireland. And Mitsubishi Chemical, who were formerly Lucite, but that changed week before last, I think, who are the world's largest producers of acrylics. So Reversis, you can see here on the screen, this is our demonstrator unit that we have built. This processes about 18 kilos of plastic an hour. It uses microwave-assisted pyrolysis of the materials, and it's the largest such demonstration of this technology to date. We've got funding from Innovate UK, which is enabling us to carry out systematic trials of these plastics. And we're working through those from virgin materials through monomaterials, mixed complex materials, so your complex laminates, metal laminates and so forth, through to post-industrial waste and post-consumer waste. The reason why we're going about it in that way is that we've spent a lot of time talking about this technology with end users, and as has been identified by other people today, end users need a really consistent product to be able to actually put it into crackers or chemical processes, and different end users may have different requirements for that, and feedstocks tend to fluctuate. So one of the things that ENVAR tells us on a regular basis is that not just on a sort of annual basis, but even seasonally or week to week, the feedstocks that they get coming through their mixed recycling facilities fluctuate quite a lot. And so what we need to do is optimize the process so that's robust to the feedstocks and provides the end users with a consistent product. And also to be able to inform brands and producers of plastics about design for recyclability. And so what we're aiming to do with this is, through these systematic trials, is to be able to systematically work out what feedstock tolerances we have. And for instance, if there are certain barrier layers, adhesives, additives, inks, etc., that lower the quality of the product. And if it's possible through this process to actually adjust the process, if we know what the feedstock is, to prevent undesirable reactions going on, or whether those individual components actually need to be engineered out of the plastics. Another example might be whether we can control the level of breakdown that occurs during the pyrolysis process so that we can reliably produce valuable oligomers, reducing the carbon footprint moving forwards of producing certain petrochemicals. And I'll talk to you about that in a bit more in a moment when we go on to the specifics of this technology. Our primary focus at the moment is films and flexibles. So we're focusing on polyolefins. This is mainly because this is a technology, as other people have identified. These are materials that can't be recycled generally through mechanical recycling. And so we need chemical recycling solutions here. But ultimately, we're working towards being able to process mixed and dirty waste. So for those who aren't familiar, pyrolysis is the breaking down of plastic through heating or pressure in the absence of oxygen. We use microwave energy to do that, causing the polymer bonds to break and producing oil, gas, and char. We are working here very much in this trial to optimize our product to end user requirements. And that means that we need to have a strong understanding of what those end user requirements are. Matthew mentioned in his introduction, point number 2 of their objectives was to identify which molecules we need to make for the chemical supply chain. And that's very much key to our process. And I'd be very interested in hearing from people who have specific requirements that they think we may be able to assist with. So why use microwaves? So the big difference between microwave assisted pyrolysis and other forms of pyrolysis is that it uses what's called volumetric heating. Conventional heating methods work by conduction and convection. So you heat a secondary material, which then conducts the heat into your target material, in this case, plastics. And so it heats the plastic from the outside in. What that means is that you tend to get hot spots, and that can cause some thermal damage, which gives you products that are not necessarily as optimal as you would wish. Microwave heating works differently. The energy enters the plastic evenly and uniformly throughout the material, heating it across the whole volume simultaneously. So you get a much more even heating of the material. You get faster heating of the material. And that means you get less secondary breakdown of the material as it goes. So we've got much more control over the final end product. And ultimately, that means we should be able to use less energy in this process and reduce the carbon footprint. The other advantages to this process are that it's actually a truly continuous process. So the materials are placed on a conveyor belt that passes through a microwave field. So it's not a batch process. It doesn't require us to power down in between and wait for everything to cool down before we can move on. As with many other pyrolysis systems, we don't need to pre-clean the material. In fact, microwave assisted pyrolysis has been used at industrial scale for biomass pyrolysis, and having biomass in the system, having these mixed and dirty plastics, can actually help with the process. It's an extremely adaptable process. Because we're using microwaves, it's electronically controlled. That means we can control things like the amount of power that's going in, the time that the feedstock stays within the power field, the residence time within the reactor. And what that means is that we can actually, depending on the feedstock that we know is going in, we can actually program our system to specifically tailor it to produce the product requirements that we have set. It also means that we can have electronic feedback systems within Reversis that allow us to have very fine control of the process. So we can flip the power on and off as we need to control the temperature at a set level. The system's also very low capex compared with a lot of other technologies. So we estimate that it would cost around £5 million to build a 20,000 ton unit. And that unit should fit the reactor itself within a single shipping container. So we're talking about a very small footprint system here. And ultimately, because we have an electronically controlled system, and we don't have a secondary material within there, and there's a very low volume of material being heated at any point because it's passing through the microwave field on a conveyor belt, that actually means that we've got very good safety controls in place. So if we need to power this down and we need to stop it, we have low thermal inertia, it's very safe, but it also means that we can solve any problems and get back up and running very quickly. So, as I said, a key thing for us is to really understand which molecules need to be made for the chemical supply chain and where this fits with our process. Now, as we do our trials, we'll be getting trial results out from this, and we'll have very detailed analysis of the products we're able to produce. And as I said, one of the things we'll be looking to is whether we can produce certain oligomers and so forth that we can actually control and consistently produce. And so we're really interested in hearing from anyone who thinks that this technology may be of interest to them and who would be willing to share their chemical requirement specifications with us. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering any questions later on in the call.
That's great, Alex. Thank you very much. So yeah, as Alex said, we are looking to sort of facilitate interactions between those on the panel and those in the audience, as well as amongst the audience. So please do get in touch if you want to share contact details with any of the presenters that you've seen, or use the chat box to share details with your fellow attendees. So to round off the presentations, I'm going to hand over to Keith from INVISTA.
Thanks, Matthew. You can hear me. Try and,
yep.
Thanks for the opportunity to present to this esteemed audience today. Is that okay, or am I sharing still?
You just need to go to display settings again.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
swap it over.
There we go. Okay, right. So this presentation, first of all, I'm going to briefly introduce the company that I work for in our business. And then the rest of the talk, there's a little bit of repetition in it. Obviously, it's the last talk in a series of talks about polymer recycling and polymer feedstocks. But hopefully I can provide an emphasis and a point of view from the company about particularly the PET area, where we think the status and the future of chemical recycling, in particular PET, is. So I work for INVISTA, and specifically for INVISTA Performance Technologies. We're part of Koch Industries, which is a large global privately owned company headquartered in the US. INVISTA Performance Technologies is the licensing arm of INVISTA. We're active in a variety of different value chains, which are articulated there on the slide. Spandex, we sell BDO manufacturing technology, THF, PTMEG, also in the nylon, particularly the nylon 6/6 value chain. We also license refinery-based technology into refinery processes as well. But obviously today, the area that I'm going to focus on is is the polyester value chain, which is a big part of our business. We sell PTA, that's purified terephthalic acid process technology, polyester polymer and staple fiber technology globally. We've delivered over the years about 150 projects in 20 different countries, principally these days in China and India. You can see I've got a map down there of where we've licensed technology in all over China and pretty widely in India, mostly in Maharashtra province there, which is where the chemical industry is based. And at the moment, we've got about $5 billion worth of investment being constructed or recently commissioned based on technology license from ourselves. So that's who we are. But before we leave the slide, I want to emphasize something here, which is really important when we're thinking about any of these technologies concerned with recycling and reuse of polymer, which is to get a feel for the size of the market here. So the PTA global demand for PTA is approximately 85 million tons a year, and notwithstanding any hiatus associated with the current coronavirus tragedy, that's growing at about 3.5% per year. So it's worth stopping and thinking about that, right? Because that equates to an annual volume growth in PTA of about 5 million tons. So the world consumes about 5 million tons more PTA every year than it did the year before. The PET also has experienced over the years a consistent and strong volume growth. It's an enormous market. So I'll talk about this. Everybody on the call, I imagine, knows this, but I'll articulate it. And Martin mentioned some of this earlier, but I'll go through again. So what are the trends then in polymers? Well, there's public pressure now to reduce the consumption of plastics. Particular emphasis on reducing plastic-generated waste. That's been initiated in Western Europe, but it's affecting public policy in India, and it's likely to progressively spill into other markets. So what are the objectives here of this? What is the objection and what are the objectives? Well, the objective to reduce plastics consumption, to reduce waste from that consumption, to increase the level of recycle within of plastics, to seek biodegradability. I had a talk earlier focusing on that, so that polymer and plastic can be seen or can actually be more benign when it finds its way into the environment. And also to seek sustainability and to seek alternative polymer materials that come from biomass type sources, preferably cellulosic biomass, but also potentially sugar as well, which is easier in some cases, but may not be the best thing. But realistically, probably we think not all of these objectives will succeed, but there they are. So what are the consequences for our business for PET? Well, the brand owners are setting targets for recycled content in packaging polymer, currently aiming for up to 50% recycled PET in bottled polymer. But they're very unlikely to compromise on quality in terms of materials going into particularly food contact applications. We're also trying to pursue an agenda for biosourced polymers, although our point of view on this is that it does seem to be stalling over the last few years, perhaps because of the sheer volume, the sheer scale required to profitably commercialize this kind of technology relevantly. But that's our observation anyway. So we expect this to drive demand for high quality recycled PET, which to meet that demand in consumption, but the market will not in the short term be able to satisfy that. We expect there to be pressure to switch to more recyclable polymers across the plastics industry and away from unrecyclable or at least difficult to economically recycle fully polymers such as PVC, polyolefins, polystyrene. And probably equally, if not more importantly, the design of packaging, we can already see that will be optimized and simplified maybe to maximize the potential for straightforward recycling. We're likely to see the introduction of more deposit schemes in Europe, and that will lead to a high quality PET recycle stream. There's going to be continuing increased pressure to develop bio-derived and biodegradable packaging polymers. And of course, we expect to see legislation in numerous territories in this area. So let's go back and talk briefly about definitions. I'm sure, again, most people know this, but we need to discriminate between what is mechanical recycling in this context and what is chemical recycling. So what we mean here, anyway, obviously with mechanical recycling, we're talking about grinding, melting and pelletizing PET that's been previously used. Practically speaking, as we sit here, this usually material of that type ends up being used in staple fiber applications. You know, if it's come from a food contact or bottle application. So, or it's recycling, it's sort of downcycling often. Chemical recycling involves melting, filtering, and depolymerizing in a manner that Martin described earlier to make BHET, DMT, or TA. So I'm not talking about going further back up the thermodynamic chain here to make pyrolysis material. I'm talking here about methanolysis, hydrolysis, glycolysis, or potentially, I guess, reaction with other alcohols. That's what I mean by chemical recycling in this context. So what do we think about the future of this type of technology? Well, the demand from brand owners for recycled content in packaging is expected to drive an increase in chemical-based recycling going forward. You know, there are multiple chemical recycling technologies that are being developed. We've heard a little bit about some earlier, but there are challenges, particularly around cost and also critically around product quality, as I outlined later. It's very unlikely that brand owners and users are going to put up with lower quality materials than are used currently. So the technology has to produce material that is comparable with virgin quality. And quality and variability of recycled feedstock is currently a major issue. And the high cost in the market of recycled PET, you know, will limit the profitability for chemical recyclers. It's currently more expensive to buy rPET flake on the market than it is to buy virgin material. So that's a kind of a market distortion in a way. So just summarizing or reiterating what I've said there, you know, PET is highly recyclable, much more so than polyolefins and other polymers. So public and political pressure will lead to increased pressure to recycle or reuse plastic waste. We're likely to see increased polymer collection rates all over the world, and deposits schemes being introduced. More sophisticated sorting technologies as the investment in that area increases. That's expected to increase the purity of recycled streams, which is beneficial. But in some circumstances, alternatives to recycling may be the better, more economic and more environmentally beneficial option. So brand owners are seeking to increase this recycled content in their packaging materials, and that's driving an increase in the price of recycled PET. Chemical recycling is a key route to enable this without compromising packaging quality. You know, you can't, without this, you're not going to be able to recycle a large proportion of the material at the same level of use, particularly in food contact use. Pressure to increase plastic recycling is unlikely, we think, to have a major effect on the demand for PET, with increasing recycle partially offset by substitution of PET for other polymers because PET is inherently more recyclable. So just finally then, what's INVISTA's interest in the area? Well, we are active in this sector. We're interested in understanding and evaluating potential recycle routes with partners. We're working currently with multiple partners to identify potential advantage recycled technologies. As we've seen, and if you look more widely, there are many technologies that are under development and multiple recycle technologies which are being commercialized at different scales. IPT is also seeking to understand how to improve the quality of chemically recycled polymer, since we see this as a key issue to meet the needs of brand owners and our customers, our current technology customers. That's all that I have.
Excellent, Keith. Thank you very much. So that brings presentations to a close, but now we've got a Q&A panel session. So thanks everyone for submitting your questions. I see we've got something like 11 questions that are currently open. So maybe I'll just start off with this one right at the top. So presumably this is for this is for Martin, based on the time it was submitted. So Jeremy Shears is asking how stable the pyrolysis oil is, and can it be readily transported to other locations for further processing, or does it need to be stabilized in some way first? Does that sound that was for you, Martin?
It does, yes. For our process, it depends on the product you're looking at. If you're looking at use in transport fuels, for example, it's pretty well known that olefinic materials, diolefinic materials, are notoriously involved in gum formation and instability. So when we do our process, that's why we do the pyrolysis initially. If we're storing products a long time, we'll actually do a hydrotreatment on them, or some other form of stabilization, but hydrotreatment is one of our preferred ones.
Okay, and a similar question here from Zena. Martin, you mentioned the need for a robust pyrolysis process. Is this about pre-treating the feed to ensure feed consistency, or about the pyrolysis process itself, e.g. reactor design, catalyst, operating conditions, etc.?
Yeah, actually, it's a combination. It's a combination of both. So one of the key things for plastic waste is getting involved and working with MRF type plastics, waste plastics. Longer term, obviously, technologies like this could ultimately be used in even reclaiming landfill sites. But there are so many diverse impurities within the plastics. There's a lot of things the waste treatment companies can do to enhance the quality of the feedstock. So we tend to use a combination of certain types of purification, washing, and other types of purification up front. The reactor choice is then quite key. So when you're looking at flow systems, that's where these considerations become even more important. So the technology that we've got, the first generation, is a flow system. It's got quite a wide tolerance of impurities, and they be things from the silica, from metal ions, particularly alkali metals, which are present in a lot of MRF type materials, and they come out in a particular part of that process. So it's a combination of the feedstock preparation and the reactor design. And as you go to more advanced reactor designs, more compact pyrolysis, for example, those considerations become even more important, because it's not just the 5, 10, 100 hours on stream in a pilot plant, or a few days on stream in a pilot plant. It's when you're working at 20,000 tons a year in a reactor, you can't afford to make mistakes at that scale. So it's really a combination of the two that are important, and it's one of the reasons we choose to do the upgrading after the pyrolysis, because a lot of the impurities are actually taken out in those two steps.
Yeah. I actually had a question to follow on from that. So you talked about the 15,000 ton plant, and I was just wondering, sort of how big do you think you can go with that? Do you think you could do a plant that's maybe 10 times or even 100 times as big as that, or were you imagining that you would have lots of plants doing 15,000 tons a year and have them placed strategically across the country?
No. In the case of the polyester plant, 15,000 ton is our base case technology, where we really use that to shake down the technology. And in fact, I probably just ought to say a big thank you to Matthew, to you, and KTN, because we were developing this technology outside of the UK, and I wasn't aware of Teesside or the manufacturing catapult there until KTN introduced us to Teesside. So forgot to say a big thank you to KTN and you, Matthew, for that. No, the 15,000 ton is actually our prototype. It's our demo. That's where that's what we've used to shake down the technology. We've designed the 50,000 ton in parallel with that. So from the 15,000 ton, the 50,000 ton will then become the base module, and that will be ready. The design's ready, or already done in parallel. So we'd see running the 15,000 ton, shake that down 3 to 6 months, and then we'll be ready to build a standard base unit of about 50,000 tons per annum.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks, Martin. So just to pick another question, so I think this might be applicable to everybody on the panel. So Matthew Shern is asking, what impact will the capability to handle mixed plastics have on package labeling? Do the public or the recyclers still need to create separate waste streams, or do we think that we can better handle the mixed waste streams when it comes to the labels put on packaging? Does anybody have any comment on that?
Or maybe oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that in the recent work we've been seeing, a lot of the packaging companies now are making labels very much easier to remove in the purification step of the plastics. So if you look at polyester bottles, for example, the water bottles, a lot of those labels are shrink wrapped. They're not glued on anymore, so it makes it very easy, or a lot easier, to take the labels from the plastics to make it a lot easier to process.
Yeah. What about you, Alex? You got?
I think what we need to be looking towards is the most user-friendly system we possibly can. Human beings are notoriously bad at doing the right thing. And so actually what we need to think about is ways that we can actually label those plastics so that the waste handlers can sort them and we're not actually relying on the consumer. So I know, for instance, one of the large supermarkets actually put monetary incentives in place for their staff to sort their back of house waste into recycling bins as best as possible, and they were still getting 25% contamination even when they put that in place. So we really need to come up with systems that don't rely on the consumers to sort it, to actually make this system work.
Yeah.
There was
got comments on that? Sorry, Martin. Sorry, Keith, go on.
I was just going to say there's one also which is related, I guess, later on about bringing in alternative polymers, biodegradable polymers or biosourced polymers as part of commercial packaging or commercial use. So, I mean, to answer that one, the issue with that really is, to my mind, simplifying from the consumer's point of view, being able to recycle what they have, put it in the right bin, make sure it goes down the right route for recycling, but also simplifying just the composition of the material. So proliferating the use of alternative polymers in some of these packaging applications is simply increasing the amount of entropy in the system. It's simply increasing the amount of complexity and actually downgrading, in some cases, the quality of the feed for recycle. So it's a difficult double-edged sword. What might appear to be a constructive and positive thing can actually end up reducing the amount of material that you can viably recycle by adding more additional components to the recycle mix. So simplifying these large volumes of material and making it straightforward for people to do the right thing, I think is the way forward. But it's very difficult.
Okay, so I've got a question for John here. So the question is, how many types of enzymes have already been discovered for breaking down plastics, and what's the bottleneck for the discovery of new enzymes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Excuse me, that's a good question. So the enzymes that you've probably seen are the ones that are breaking down polyesters, which, as we know, are some of the easiest plastics to break down by any process. So what's quite interesting is we're starting to see in the scientific literature evidence of biological systems, be it organisms. You've maybe seen mealworms and caterpillars eating through polyethylene bags. It's very likely that those processes are carried out by bacteria producing enzymes, and we're currently looking at what they are. We have some of those in the laboratory at the moment under investigation. But I think for harder plastics like polyolefins, it's going to be difficult to find enzymes that can do that. We're going to have to search far and wide to get anything. There are some systems out there that do work, but they're very slow, and you have to think about the efforts required to make those fast enough to be economically viable at scale. So yes, there are other systems out there, and we're looking hard to try and find them. I think it could be quite exciting if we can do that, because if we can find enzyme systems, certainly for some waste streams, we will gain a lot in energy savings by going down a biological route.
Mm-hmm. And does your research sort of mainly focus on discovering new enzymes sort of already existing in the environment, or do you do a lot of bioengineering, replacing DNA to sort of tweak the performance of them?
We do both, actually, and I must say the community is actually very open. When people discover new bacteria or enzymes, they go into public databases, and as we do, everything's open access and public. So we're very keen to share those discoveries as soon as they come out. We do also need to keep an eye on how to robustly commercialize those things as well. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. But yes, so we have a big discovery program, but that's in collaboration with many other groups, and groups will come to us. I guess our main facility is actually the engineering side. So we've got a couple of 100 enzymes under development at the moment, just for PET. And we're working on several other batches for other types of plastics.
So there's an interesting question down here from Andrew Hanratty. He's asking if any of these processes that we've heard from this morning can handle WEEE plastics with the brominated fire retardant additives. So does anybody think they can crack that nut?
I can give a brief answer on that one.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two issues when you're dealing with those sorts of things. One is whether it causes damage to your actual reactor system. And the second is whether the chemical product you get out at the end can actually be used and either post-processed to remove it, or the reaction itself can remove it so it doesn't cause damage. So you couldn't put something like that necessarily into a large cracker system. One of the things we're interested in long-term with our technology is, as I mentioned, because microwave is volumetric heating, you're heating the material in a cold environment. And because the environment around it is cold, and you can actively cool the area around the heated material if you want to, that gives us the potential to build reactors from materials that might be inert to things like bromines and so forth, but we're quite a long way off that process, and that will have to be specialist work later on. But then you would still need to ensure that you were cleaning those products out of the final chemical products before it could go on for further processing, I think.
From the biological route, enzymes are very specific, and so far we've not seen any significant effects from contaminants. But of course, we really need to be working with lots of different real waste streams. That was not model systems. So again, that's why we need to partner very closely with the recycling industries to make sure we're doing that from the start. But yes, indeed, as Alex said, dealing with some of those more toxic products afterwards through separations is something we're currently looking into. But yeah, it's not been solved yet.
Yeah. I suppose that question is touching on the parallel challenge of recovering rare earth elements from the waste electronics, and yeah, it's a good point that there's actually quite a lot of plastic materials in and amongst the metals in there. So it might be interesting to see how those get recovered as well. So let's pick another one. So Durant Evans is asking, when we talk about the biodegradability of plastics, does this not mean that the plastics convert into carbon dioxide, which is also a significant problem? Are we failing to consider the unintended consequences of biodegradability, and what alternatives might there be? Anybody want to take that on? There was a similar question I saw earlier about obviously the fact that if we're moving to use more biodegradable materials, these are going to end up in the environment and they're going to partly degrade. But then if we're talking about collecting that, you know, they've got the potential for the biodegradable materials to sort of end up polluting the waste streams that you're going to be using the chemical recyclings on. So I suppose the pertinent question is how robust are the technologies to dealing with, you know, some fraction of biodegradable material in there, and how can you filter that out, or how can you break that down and get rid of it and not pollute the final product?
I think one of the things that's touched upon by Keith Martin and Alex, actually, that we were very keen to try and push towards a circular economy. So we want to grab that carbon back if possible and then reuse it into the system. So I can't really speak for the contamination within, you know, the recycling methods that were used earlier, but yeah, clearly it is an issue. But then we also have to weigh up about those, particularly films and things where they're degrading down to microplastics if they're not biodegradable. And that's worse. So there is a really complicated balance here.
I would like to emphasize that point. You know, it's really important we're talking about biodegradability to the point that Alex was making earlier. If you are using this as a marketing ploy to try to release people from a feeling of guilt for disposing of plastic in an irresponsible way, then, you know, we need all of us, I think, in the industry to robustly, you know, rebuff that kind of thing. It's when we're talking about biodegradable polymer, we need to be really clear that it is truly biodegradable to the point where it is benign in the environment and not a source of more microplastics that are, you know, obviously problematic in the environment. And it's very difficult because a lot of people don't understand this, I think. But I agree. So we've got to be careful when you use the word biodegradable that we really mean that it's something that's going to degrade to the point that it is truly benign in the environment.
I think another point is that it's important that people understand the difference between biodegradable and bioplastics as well, because there's a big difference between if you're going from a route from plants to plastic and breaking down, than if you're going from fossil fuels to plastic and breaking down. The carbon footprint of those are going to be very different.
Absolutely, Alex. And then, of course, biodegradable and biocompostable, just to add another complication into the mix that I think is very confusing to people, but actually incredibly important as to the final fate of that plastic.
Okay, thanks everyone. So this question here from Derek Stewart is actually pointing at something I was going to ask John earlier, which was, what about using AI-based enzyme design for accelerated evolution and discovery of these enzymes? Can you use computational techniques to sort of predict what enzymes should exist, and hence ones that you could sort of create in the lab?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, one of the hires that we've just made is a computational chemist who's pure theoretician, will never ever wear a lab coat, and actually has profited brilliantly from being in lockdown because he does most of his computation from his kitchen. But actually, yeah, so using AI is a really, really powerful technique and becoming even more powerful. So yes, the computer fans are currently wearing on that. Actually, there's a few groups in the world as well that are helping us with this. And I think we can't quite yet design enzymes from scratch. We kind of need a template already from nature, but in the future we hope to be able to design those kind of custom enzymes for specific groups.
Yeah. So John Ferguson's asked a couple of questions. The first one about talking about the rapid evolution of these different technological approaches to plastic waste management, and do we risk throwing everything at the problem in an uncoordinated way? So I suppose this is raising the issue of how do we make sure that we are combining these technologies in a way that's going to maximize their impact. So how do we properly engage the whole sort of value chain and stakeholder community to make sure we get these things right? I mean, it's a webinar series like this, we're trying to do that, and there's other schemes like the UK Circular Plastics Network, for example, and the work that's going on around the Smart Sustainable Plastic Packaging Challenge Fund. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that point about engaging with members of different parts of the value chain and stakeholder community.
I do think
maybe I can just add. Maybe I'll just add some comments here. I think the value of the KTN networks and networking amongst all of us is that it's one platform where we can all share data and approaches together. But I think the difficulty lies in really when you select the technologies, because all of us on this call are actually representing commercial companies. Their business is to make profit and to develop technologies to solve the problems. So a lot of the stuff is quite proprietary to the partners. So I'm not sure how we get around that. But for me, actually, these networking events are fantastic because you can always pick up bits and pieces from other people's work that might be relevant and vice versa. And I think over the next few years, that type of approach is going to be quite useful for getting the ultimate solution for a lot of these waste materials.
I mean, I guess what I would say is that in terms of improving polymer recycling, chemical recycling, and so on, forgive me, there's a plane going overhead. It's or a helicopter. It's not, the solutions aren't only technology solutions, are they? There's a huge amount of investment and infrastructure that needs to go in to improve this internationally, and that's outside our scope of this discussion, I guess. But that's the reality of the situation. If you look at the volumes involved here, the real issue is, can we improve what we do, but can we do a lot more of what we currently can do? And that involves investment and doing that in a smart and organized way.
I think just to pick on something, I know Sally Beckin is a proponent of which is, making sure, and this really counts for us, especially at the moment as we're developing kind of TRL 1 and 2 technologies and hoping to get up there eventually, is looking at an early stage techno-economic analysis and life cycle analysis, just to make sure that we're making sensible comparisons to what's already out there. And it's pretty difficult, and we have some people that are working on this, but there's some of those numbers that are quite difficult to estimate, actually, particularly when you think about the scales required to do this for the problem at hand. And I think, investment in this area is maybe one way of aligning people towards a kind of common goal, because I do think there'll be a mix. I don't think there's one solution to fit everything. And I think there's a misconception, particularly in the academic world, maybe that it's highly competitive. It's not actually, it's highly collaborative. And I think that's something that would be really good to get across. But I agree that this type of network is perfect for discussing kind of the open pros and cons of each solution.
To put Sally on the spot here, I think she's actually on the call. We were at a meeting in Birmingham was it just before lockdown or last year? I think you were there, John, where the sort of major outcome of that meeting in Birmingham was it the Birmingham or the Manchester? I can't remember. Anyway, where the major outcome of it was that we said we need a unified LCA tool that we can all use so that we're all comparing apples with apples. So if Sally's there, it'd be really interesting to hear if there's been any sort of movement on that, or if COVID has kind of stalled.
I'm sure Sally might be able to put some info in the chat box there. So I want to come back to the point about investment and where we see the investment actually coming from. So obviously we have the public funds through ISCF, for example, that are putting money into doing some of this investment. But obviously that's probably not going to be enough to get us there in 2050. So there's going to be a lot of private investment that needs to come in. And I just wonder if anyone on the panel has had any experience of trying to bring investors in to fund projects like this, and what maybe some of the hurdles are. Do you think that the investment community is informed enough about what this is going to take? You know, so some of these technologies are more capex intensive than other ones, and they have different they're going to have different value chains associated with them, and so it's quite a complicated picture. Do you think that that's kind of a hurdle to sort of big investors coming into this space?
You think
I know.
comment
sorry, Martin. Sorry, Keith.
And I was just going to say, I think Martin.
What was that, Keith? Sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, Keith. Oh, yeah, I'm going to say we missed that, right. Keith.
Oh, you're on mute again, Keith. There we go. Could you say that again, Keith?
I was going to say, Martin, I thought that would be up your street, that question, in terms of interacting with a wide cross-section of investors.
Yes, I mean, this is what I said at the beginning, that when we're all in commercial ventures here, so one of the first things we do as a commercial investment group is do freedom to operate due diligence on the different technologies, and spend a lot of time reviewing and looking at the competitive technologies and the state of which they're in for readiness. So it's in my view, as long as you've got a solid business case and you can present a very compelling business case for investment and return on that investment, there are investors out there that are very, very savvy, will understand that, and it depends on the market sectors you're going for as well. So all of our projects that I've talked today have all got multiple partners downstream, investors downstream, that are not only investing in the technology but also off taking the products. So it's all about the business case at that point. So I think that's when you're at a technology TRL level, you know, 7, 8, 9. If you're using stage gates, when you're in execute define, it's pretty straightforward as long as you choose the right partners.
John, did you have something to say as well?
Just to echo some of those points that Martin said. He's more knowledgeable in the field than me, but our experience is that we have a lot of people coming to us, but they want high TRL level solutions, and you know, by yesterday, and that's quite difficult. You know, from an academic point of view, even hiring and getting those experiments done to be able to develop technologies is very time consuming. So there is often a disconnect between expectations and what can be delivered from an academic standpoint. So I think there is a lot of opportunities for companies to come and work with academia and cross that bridge. And we're really trying to marry those two together, because I think we can benefit a lot from each other. But it's difficult. It is difficult.
Yeah. Alex, I remember in the conversation with you, you were saying that the eventual commercial exploitation of the microwave pyrolysis process would be done through a separate sort of vehicle. And is that something that you'd be looking to get investment in at some point to set that up and take that forward?
Yes, so we've, as with Martin, we've been talking to investors from a very early point in this process. I have to say, I've been really impressed. They've been very hands-on, very interested. It's very much a two-way process for us, so we need quite a lot of information from them. A lot of the investors in this area now are actually the plastics producers, the brands, the end users, the petrochemical companies. And so not only can they bring investment, but they can actually bring expertise to this process and information to this process to speed it forward. So I actually think the investors have been really engaged and really do know the field quite well, and are quite open as well. So You take a lot of the big brands, they're investing in a lot of different technologies at a relatively early stage, with the idea that they don't know which of these in the end is going to be the best one. So they're sort of backing multiple horses at the beginning. And again, as John has identified a couple of times during this, that it may be that some of these technologies need to be brought together and can learn from each other, and work collaboratively to actually provide a final solution. And I think the investors recognize that as well. So investing in multiple technologies is not necessarily just sort of betting on different ones and sort of hedging their bets, but it's actually a strategic choice to bring them together.
Just another question for John. You're talking about the people you're speaking to wanting these high TRL processes kind of as of yesterday. What do you see as the commercialization route for the processes that you are developing, especially given the fact that you said that a lot of the information is kind of made public? So how do you create the sort of protected intellectual property in that space, and then what's the model for bringing that to market? Is it through a spin out, or is it through licensing to established commercial operators?
So yeah, that's we're wrangling with those questions at the moment, actually. So one thing we realized early on is that we do need to provide industry with a different set of information. So we need to provide them with the detailed quality control on the products that we produce, and we need to be able to take those monomers and resynthesize and then say, look, this is food grade quality, it's got X amount of contaminants, etc. So that's why we've really moved in. Our current funding is looking towards the polymer chemistry side of things, so that we can marry up enzymes with the polymer chemistry side of things for biorecycling. In terms of how we would move forward, we have had a lot of company interest, private investor interest, even charities and wealthy individual interest. And we're trying to figure out the best way forward. I'd imagine as a university, the easiest way would be to license, processes. But that's complicated by many companies taking out literally hundreds of patents in the area. So we would be very upset if this really stifles the whole community. And I don't know how we solve that, actually, because as we mentioned, every company is looking to derive a profit from the process that they use.
And are the patents being taken out on processes, or patents being taken out on the enzymes themselves, and
both?
They're just making it difficult to sort of operate?
Both of those things are happening. Yeah, as you would expect, though, for any new process that has got commercial opportunities. As a university, we publish open access, so all our data is readable and usable. But of course, that's not potentially an ideal model for an investor or a venture capitalist, for example.
Yeah. So I've still got a few questions live. We've kind of answered the first couple of ones. Question to Keith and Daniel Stewart. I think you might have touched on this already, actually, but is there much scope to look beyond traditional PET that being derived from tetraphthalic acid and ethylene glycol? Is there interest in alternative ester-based polymers?
Yeah, so I guess the obvious one there is PEF, polyester furanoate, which there's a lot of interest in that, and that's one of the polymers I referred to in my talk about. There seems to be a lot of interest in trying to scale up manufacture. The difficulties with it are, like I said before, around if you introduce it into the PET value chain, then you're going to contaminate that with another polymer or another monomer, which could introduce issues in terms of the use of the recyclate. My personal opinion is that there may be a market for that material, but probably in specialist applications where it provides value in use. In that case, PEF can provide some improved barrier properties. So you have to find a market for that material where it's providing a value for the consumer. this is the problem really with a lot of these polymer applications, is that the customer is buying they're not even conscious of it some of the time. I think they're buying an effect, a packaging effect, and what you're offering them, if you're offering them an alternative material, is often no further improvement in that, right? You're just offering them an alternative. So, but in the case of PEF, I think you probably can argue that it might find a market there. But that's the difficulty with those materials, plus the difficulty of producing them economically on a reasonable scale, where again, in that case, I think, still sort of saying in the press, so I think it was a 50 kiloton plant going to be I can't remember, I think Avantium is still involved with that in the next few years. But that's still very small, really, But anyway, that's my view on that.
We had another question coming for John, actually. Are thermophilic, this is from Helen Liang, are thermophilic microbes any good for plastic degradation? Are you looking into using whole cells or just the enzymes themselves for large scale processes?
So yes, we are. So the thermophilic enzymes, when you get to enzymes that are operating 60 or 70 degrees happily at the glass transition temperature of PET, for example, then you have a huge gain in efficiency. And we saw a paper published in Nature this year by Carbios, the French company who are looking at this, showing very improved enzyme rates. So yeah, that's we've got a whole set of those that we're currently looking at the moment. So yeah, I think there's big opportunities for efficiency there, and it's that those sorts of temperatures are not too hot, so they're still reasonably low energy. In terms of the bacteria, using the bacteria themselves, there are other groups working on that. We are not at the moment. The idea there is that you kind of use those bacteria to produce enzymes, which are then, and those monomers are then uptaken by the bacteria into central catabolism to make biomass, or diverted to some sort of a green chemistry type of product. I think there's wide scope for that to happen. Getting it at scale and being efficient is going to be the hard thing there. So the products would need to be very valuable.
Okay, great. So I think that basically wraps up the questions we've had in. It's quite good. We've been talking for about 40 minutes. So I think that just leaves me to say thanks to everybody for watching and getting involved. Thanks to our panel of speakers for some excellent presentations. This webinar was recorded, so those of you who participated will get the recording link afterwards, as well as the presentations, and look forward to the brokerage event on the 15th of December. It should be really good to get everybody back together again and start to think about brokering some of these new relationships that we're going to need to start moving these things forward. So with that, I'd like to just close the webinar and wish everybody a good rest of the week.
Thanks, everyone.